Hello, and thank you for joining me on this episode of the In Talks With podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Radoichin, and on this episode we're going to be talking about Anthony Caro, who designed the London Millennium Footbridge which spans the Thames between St Paul's Cathedral and the Tate Modern, who worked with Henry Moore, and who, with his vision and restless drive, broke through the stagnation of the art world in post-war Britain. A major exhibition of Anthony Caro's work is currently on view at Pitzhanger Manor and Gallery in Ealing, West London, itself a landmark of the British cultural landscape. With me to discuss Caro's work and the way the work in the exhibition complements the space around it and opens up new ideas around Caro's work is the director of Pitzhanger Manor and Gallery, Claire Goff, whom I met for tea last month in her gallery-adjacent office. Hello. Hi,
Hello.
Claire. Thank you for having me here at Pitzhanger Manor.
Such a pleasure to have you here.
Day before the coronation.
Yes.
Lots of bunting out and about. So we are here. We've just been looking at the Anthony Caro exhibition, which is here. How long is it open for?
So it opened in March, actually on Anthony Caro's what would have been his 99th birthday, which was rather lovely. He died about 10 years ago, but it would have been his 99th birthday in March. And it's here until September, until just after the school holidays are finished.
Yeah, so there's plenty of opportunity to see it. And we were just walking around it, and it's really feels like it's almost could have been made for the space.
Yes.
The way that it interacts with the building itself. The building itself was bought by the architect Sir John Soane in 1800, I believe.
Yes,
and then
right.
he mostly rebuilt it.
Yes.
Before we move on to speak about Anthony, I thought it might be nice to start with you talking a bit about the building itself.
Yeah.
And the mission of the gallery.
Absolutely. So John Soane, the architect, bought Pitzhanger in 1800, and he was about 46 when he bought it, and he just finally made his name and a nice pile of money as architect and surveyor to the Bank of England. It'd taken him quite a long time to establish his career, but he finally felt he needed to have a country house to sort of reflect his newfound status, but more importantly as a place where he could show off to his clients and friends what he could do. I think the sort of plan was invite people to dinner and hope that they over dinner said, I'd quite fancy a room like this. So he'd get commissions through it. And there's a rather sweet story about why he bought where he did. Because he wanted to have this be able to entertain his clients in that way. There was no point in having a house miles away. It needed to be close to central London. And Ealing in those days was just a village outside London. London ended at Marble Arch. But it was only an hour's carriage ride from his home in Lincoln Fields, so it felt like a good distance away. So he was looking around this area, about to buy somewhere else, and at the last minute, Pitzhanger Manor came for sale, and he snapped up the chance because as a young man at the age of 15, his very first job as an apprentice had been to build an extension to the existing Georgian manor there. So he bought Pitzhanger, knocked down all the house pretty much, except for the extension. So you get his rather quirky, very Sonian villa attached to this Georgian wing, which has two rather beautiful rooms in it. And it's very much him saying, that's what I did when I was a mere apprentice, but look at me now, I'm a great architect.
You can sense this confidence in his mission when you walk around the building.
Yes.
And you've decorated it now similarly to his aesthetic, or how he would have liked it to have been.
Absolutely. So the whole place, after Soane left it, it went through a whole mass of changes, extensions, and then very sadly somebody painted over the entire inside, painted out the glorious decorative schemes with white paint, so it lost the impact of his designs. So in 2016 we went through a major conservation project to take it back to how it would have been in Soane's time, and that meant peeling back the layers to get it.
That must have been so exciting.
So exciting. Such an amazing project. I was lucky enough to be here while they were doing it. And anybody who's been through a building renovation work, you all know you go through those very painful moments where it seems that all you're doing is destroying things and making mess and discovering asbestos or whatever. And then you get that magical moment when it starts coming together and you start recreating it, and paint schemes that you've been researching for years to get exactly right start getting put on the wall, and it just transforms it. So we feel that after the conservation project, which finished in 2019 when we reopened to the public, the house got its soul back. And you just have, on a beautiful sunny day like today, you just need to walk in and see the sunbeams coming in as so-and-so playfully uses light to bounce off the walls, have reflections and shadows, puddles of stained glass light in the room, so that it just comes to life. And that's been a real joy to see.
Such a beautiful space. And you've had exhibitions here by major sculptors and artists. Anish Kapoor, Devlin, Julian Opie. Why did you feel like Anthony Caro was the next good fit?
Yes. So you were asking about our sort of our mission, and what we try to do at Pitzhanger is really to pick up the legacy of John Soane himself. When John Soane built Pitzhanger, not only was he showing off to his clients what he could do, but he very much used the space as a display space for his rather eclectic collection to inspire young architects in their work. And so he would have items ranging from antiquities that he had found on his grand tour from ancient Greece and Rome, through to contemporary art. So he was great friends with J.M.W. Turner, and so he'd have some of his paintings, Canalettos, Hogarths, and he'd display those in the house and use those to inspire his young sort of trainees and apprentices. And so we've tried to pick up that idea, and we see as our vision to use Pitzhanger to inspire young people and young future generations in art, architecture and design. So the exhibitions that we do in the main gallery, we always try to have a thread that joins them to John Soane and his designs. And Soane was so broad in his interests, it's quite easy to do that. But with all of the artists, Anish Kapoor playing with form, with colour, with shape, and with Anthony Caro, I think what we got very excited about was Anthony Caro, in his experimentation with abstract sculpture, was really fascinated about the transition between sculpture and architecture. Where does one stop and the other start, and how you incorporate architecture into sculpture. So it felt like a perfect fit of something to do. And Caro himself plays a lot with light and how it hits the sculpture, reflections, how it goes through perspex glass. We've got one lovely piece, one large piece in the main gallery, which is called Autumn Rhapsody, in which he incorporates yellow perspex. And this is exactly what Soane is doing. Soane uses amber stained glass in some of his windows and his roof lights to create sort of lovely effects with how the light falls through it. So it's just really fun to see the two juxtaposed.
Yeah, having a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we've done both with Caro and some of the artists we've had before, we've enjoyed trying to spread them out a bit beyond just the gallery. So we've taken them out into the grounds, but also into the house itself to really carry on that conversation with with Soane and his inspiration and designs.
I think it just really works so well. So let's talk about the man himself. He born in 1924 in London or just outside.
Yeah.
What kind of family was he born into?
So he was born into an affluent family. His father was a stockbroker, and he went to Charterhouse School, so had a very affluent start in life, unlike John Soane, who very much started from very humble beginnings. Went to art school, and of his own initiative watched somebody who was really inspiring him, Henry Moore, and just turned up on Henry Moore's doorstep and said, "Hello, I'd like to work for you." Henry Moore, I think, must have been slightly surprised by this and said, "Look, come back in a year." Anthony said, "Okay, I'll do that." And to the day, he turned back a year later. I think Henry Moore thought, "Okay, that's pretty dedicated," and took him in. So he worked with Henry Moore for a while, and I think learned a huge amount from that. But fairly quickly, Caro decided that he did not want to do figurative.
Did he talk about his experiences of working with Moore and what he learned from him? Or
yes, and I think very much wanted to carve out his own route, which was going to be different, and so very quickly he did experiment with doing figurative paintings but figurative sculptures, but quickly moved on to the abstract and really started carving out his own way through that.
And he came of age in a sort of post-war environment.
Yes.
Can you give me a sense of what the environment would have been like in London? I'm assuming he was in London at this point. What it was like then for art and sculpture.
Yes. So I think everybody was trying to establish some new ways of thinking and break away from what had been done before, and really carve out some different ways of approaching things. And one of the most important things that Caro did was abandoning the podium on which sculpture was placed. And he just wanted you to have a direct relationship with him and with it. And you feel that with the sculptures in the gallery that we've got here. You come straight up against them. They're not being, there's no interface between them and you.
They're directly on the floor.
Directly on the floor. And I think it's interesting because today we don't notice that so strongly. It's just like, yes, of course. But I think that was really quite revolutionary at the time.
And I suppose what I'm thinking of is what was happening. I mean, if you think about what's happening in Paris, and obviously there was massive leaps in modernism at that time, but was it considered, the kind of work he was doing, and certainly more, was it considered quite sort of radical? Was it still quite a conservative atmosphere here?
Yes, it was. Yeah. And I think it was
only
when
to break through that he wanted to be
really wanted to, and it was only really when he went to America that he really started and got challenged by critics that he started finding.
He went out there to do an exhibition, or
to work,
yeah,
and to do an exhibition, and got challenged that he wasn't being radical enough. And I think it was then that he came back and started really feeling confident with going his very abstract way.
What was he like as a person?
Very sadly, I've never met him, but I've met a lot of people who've worked closely with him and knew him well, and he seems to be a really lovely person. I've never heard anything other than that. We worked very closely in preparation for this show with his studio assistant of over 40 years. Well, you can't keep a studio assistant for 40 years unless you've got a good relationship with them. And that was Pat Cunningham, and Pat has been an absolute delight to work with.
He helped you with the
helped
show,
very much with the show. He knows all of the sculptures intimately. In many cases has actually created them to Caro's instruction, but Caro would give Pat instructions. And how Caro works, very different from so many other sculptors, but Caro doesn't create a maquette, doesn't plan the sculpture first and then create it. He adds to it. He puts something on, he finds pieces of scrap and junk lying around, and they speak to him. He finds something that moves him, and finally works out where he wants to put it, and he puts it on, and then we'll go, no, I've done too much, and he takes a bit off and he adapts it. So it's very much an iterative process. He doesn't know where it's going at the beginning. And then he talks rather beautifully about how you get to a point where you just know it's there. It's saying, leave me alone. That's it.
That's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting that he worked in such a instinctive way, and not to be a planner.
Yes.
Because you think by looking at those pieces, you think, gosh, structurally, he must be so technical. And that's so interesting to have that confidence.
Yes, absolutely. And then also that rather lovely thing of putting it on, taking it off, adding a bit here, and very much, sort of, I like that, but that edge is too sharp. Take that off.
Also, having knowing when to finish is quite unusual, because I hear so many artists saying that, I could have carried on working on it forever, and you never know when to stop.
Yes, it is really interesting, and I think he was quite good at just taking that step back and saying, it's talking to me now.
Yeah, it shows the kind of real vision.
Yes. And he talks rather beautifully about how he wants the sculpture to speak to you, and he says so lots of people ask him, how am I meant to understand this sculpture? And he says, it's not about understanding, it's stand in front of it and let it flow over you, let it impact you. And he says what he wants the sculpture to do is to hit you in the solar plexus, you to sort of be struck by it. And he also clearly really valued the opinion of a few people, and so would say there are people who will tell me, that needs to go, or it's not quite right.
That's interesting. So who were they?
Various different advisors. I'm sure some of his studio assistants, certainly some critics that he was close to, but he usually felt he was in harmony. He was feeling it, and they would say, that's got to go. And he just felt he knew. I mean, it is that very interesting thing, as you say, some artists would want to carry on forever, but he knew, no, it's time to stop now.
So he found success, I think, in his 30s that
Yes.
he became successful. And was he
Yes.
sort of financially successful and
Yes, he
celebrated
was.
his lifetime?
Yes, yes, absolutely, and continued having exhibitions across the world, and an exhibition at Tate, very late in his career, and carried on evolving and doing different types, pursuing different areas. So one area that he explored particularly was his table sculptures, where he has these wonderful things that were now, so going back, having taken things off the podium, now putting them back on again, but having them dripping off.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that piece
way.
in the exhibition that does that.
There are two lovely pieces in our exhibition. So all the pieces that we've selected for this exhibition very much, we feel, respond to the concept of architecture and creating rooms, creating hidden spaces within them, sometimes that you can see into, sometimes that you have to imagine your way into. But two of the pieces, very solid steel pieces, heavy, solid pieces, but he has them on the edge of a table and they come down the side of it, and it feels as though they're dripping down the side. And it's this wonderful contrast in your mind of, they look fragile and unstable, and yet they also look very solid and stable too. And he does that very cleverly.
What about the materials that he was using? So a lot of it was found.
Yeah.
It looks quite heavy and industrial.
Yes.
A lot of it.
Yes.
What was his whole approach to materials?
So he does a huge amount with steel, but later then experiments with so many other materials, and we've had a lot of fun in this exhibition, which is of his later works, displaying things in a whole variety of different materials, particularly in the North Gallery. All the works there are in different materials, and those range from concrete, cast concrete, through to tin, some recycled tin. He found some beautiful old bits of a cricket ground loudspeaker. They're beautiful, elegant sort of loudspeaker phone shapes that he's incorporated into a sculpture, but other bits are in wood. There's another one in there which is called Treasure House. It's a small piece, and if you look at it very closely, you realise what you're looking at is a whole set of Allen keys inside the sculpture, and it transpires that they were Pat's Allen keys, and he comes into the studio one day and can't find his Allen keys, and it's because Caro has nicked them and put them in the sculpture. Nothing was safe. But Pat tells lovely stories about how they could be walking along somewhere once along there was a station, I think at a tube station, and Pat says, and Caro says, oh, I quite fancy that thing that's down in the tracks. So Pat has to go back to the station helpers and get them to help him get out, extract from the tracks this piece of abandoned scrap that's down there. And then he would bring it back to the studio and live with it for a while. He wouldn't necessarily know. He knew he loved it, but didn't quite know where it was going. It would just have to live with him for a while. Come out, have a little prod, have a little think, go away again, and maybe sometimes as much as 3 months later, he'd go, okay, I want that piece, and it would come in and then it would be incorporated into a sculpture. So it's quite fun knowing where all these different pieces.
Yeah. And was he based? Did he stay in London?
Yeah. So his studio was in Camden. And they still have the studio there, and they open the studio now for open studios now, so you can come and see some of the works that he left to the studio. And initially, of course, as a young artist, worked on his own, and it was only later that he was able to have the luxury of assistants like Pat to do some of the work for him, which I think he then found quite useful because it gave him more of an opportunity to take a step back and watch the piece as it.
And he had a family here.
Yes, he
married,
did. Yes,
children.
two boys, and yeah.
What about the way his thoughts on how the works were viewed or interpreted? When you were kindly showing me through the gallery just now, we stopped to look at you have a clip projected onto a screen from a South Bank show that where Melvyn Bragg was interviewing him. When do you think it was? In the 70s?
I think that was when he was 70, so it'd be 1990s.
Oh, 1990s,
yeah.
Okay. We were admiring their suits.
Yes.
But Melvyn Bragg in that is sort of asking him about, what he thinks about how people can be intimidated by abstract sculpture and don't know how they're expected to respond, or is there a way they're supposed to respond and it makes them feel maybe that they're not understanding something. What were his thoughts about that kind of thing?
So Caro felt quite strongly that there was no message you were meant to be taking from them. He didn't want you to understand. People often used to say to him, I don't understand the sculpture. And he had this wonderful phrase he would reply, he'd say, what do you mean understand sculpture? How do you understand your breakfast? You don't understand your breakfast, you just enjoy it, you admire it, you enjoy it. And he wanted people just to stand in front of his sculptures and let them wash over them and be impacted by them. And respond to them, just allow themselves to respond. And I think there's a very interesting moment in that discussion, which I think possibly it's a conversation that one wouldn't have today, but I think as two men talking in the 90s, Caro, is a man born in the 1920s, talks about how one's not really allowed to talk about one's feelings. And I think that does represent something of a different age, that we are much more comfortable about talking how we respond to something today. But maybe for a man then that was harder, and he wanted people to be affected by his sculptures. He talks in that same program about if one of his pieces is really effective, when you stand in front of it, it's like being hit in the solar plexus. It just leaves an impact on you. And I think he's wanting people to feel comfortable enough to just let them respond to it, not suppress, not think intellectually, what should I be thinking, but just allow it to affect them.
Yeah. It's nice for people to know that, isn't it? I mean, I think certainly when we were in the exhibition just now and looking at the smaller pieces, like you said, the cricket pitch loudspeaker, for example, which I would have had no idea that was what it was, but it's taking things out of their original context and giving them they're put in a new space and you see the shapes in a different way. But it's nice for people to know that they have the freedom to interpret something however they want, and it doesn't matter, and there are no expectations imposed on them. Yeah.
I think that's right.
That's quite modern. It's a modern.
It is. It is. And just appreciating the beauty of something when it's not trying to be something else. And I think that's something it was a really important thing. I'm no longer trying to create, I'm not doing a picture of a person, I'm not saying this is, my friend Joe. It's just trying to create an impact and effect.
Was he part of any contemporary art movement or crowd or scene in London?
That's very interesting, and I don't really know of who he's sort of most mixed with. Actually, Caro's wife, Sheila Girling, was also an artist, but perhaps rather overlooked in her lifetime, perhaps because she was married to Anthony.
Yeah, so the classic story of the wife having to, perhaps because she had to do more of the housework.
Yeah.
And did his work evolve?
Hugely. So he went through a whole number of phases where he was responding to different things. So I think this architectural phase is something he'd been grappling with for a while, but it's very much a later stage of his work. And one of the pieces we looked at in the gallery, the first thing you see as you come in, is this rather fabulous piece in Japanese oak, very unusual type of oak. That's right bang in the middle as you come into the gallery. It's a huge, big sort of conical shaped thing that's called Child's Tower Room. And with this, having experimented with architecture meets sculpture and creating these hidden rooms within sculpture, he then actually decides to go one step further and create something that you actually can go inside. The other pieces you look at from the outside and try to imagine what the rooms are, but with this one you actually go inside, and children are encouraged, indeed adults, I've been up it too, adults are encouraged to go in it. And
what was it like going inside it?
Oh, it's absolutely lovely go inside. I have to say, it's easier to go in as a child. You slightly fit around those corners slightly better than I do. But it's fun, and it is fun thinking about the space that you're in and thinking about your view of things when you see them through certain windows in it.
That Japanese wood is so nice.
It's lovely.
So warm.
It's lovely. And it is a real joy to see the pleasure that children get from climbing within it and finding the windows to peep out of and exploring the different rooms. It's although it's a spiral staircase, each step is of a different shape and depth. And so it is a voyage of exploration inside it.
So in that way, it's almost a bit. It's not. What's the word? It's not too manufactured. It's the fact that it has that different.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Something a bit quirky about it.
Yeah.
And he taught as well.
He did.
From his 50s right through to his death.
No, and lots of artists today who remember being taught, and Gilbert and George were taught by him. Lots of people.
Yeah, and he seems to be remembered, very fondly.
I think
by those
so.
people and seems
Yes,
to have been
absolutely.
quite influential as a teacher.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on his legacy or how his work stands up today? 'Cause for me, when I walk in, I think, gosh, it feels completely contemporary.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right, and that's why it's fun in a way to do an exhibition like this 10 or so years after his death, because I think they are incredibly strong works. So you've got new displays just recently, his amazing set of sculpture called Goodwood Steps has just been opened in the Sainsbury Centre in East Anglia, and I think they are really dramatic and absolutely have stood the test of time. There's no doubt that it's harder maintaining the reputation of somebody once they're gone, and I think that's very much the role of the Anthony Caro Centre, is to encourage people to come back and see his works. But I think we recently took a group of people to the Anthony Caro Centre to see a range of his works over a bigger period.
So, and where is the centre?
It's in his old studios in Camden.
And is it open to the public?
It is open to the public on certain visiting days, and his use of colour in some of his early sculptures, how he painted the steel, it's really dramatic, and I think still very current, very fresh today, and really worth looking at. And
you personally, as the director here, how did you find this show in comparison to the previous ones you've done, or any shows you've done anywhere? What were the challenges and rewards of doing a show like this?
Yeah, well, I think what I love about putting on these exhibitions is each show has its different challenges and its different returns, and hits you in different ways. And one of the things I was saying when we were going around the gallery is that before every exhibition, you've worked so hard on what's going where, you've worked on the plans, the size of the piece, you've thought very carefully about where it should go. But there's something that, despite all that planning, you just can't prepare for. Something, when you get the pieces on site, looks different, feels different. Sometimes it's just that the colour works in a different way to how you expect it, or it just looks bigger in the space. And one of the joys of this exhibition was seeing that the pieces work even better within the Sonian space than we were expected. They just respond beautifully. We've got a big piece out in the park called Forum, and it's got a huge, big, dramatic funnel in it, and we'd worked very carefully to think through where it should go, and it just responds to its landscape even better than I had hoped. We have an old cedar tree that was from the time of Soane, in fact predated Soane, was from the old Georgian house, that 2 cedar trees are in the park, and very sadly, in the storm that we had just over a year ago, Storm Eunice, it was struck down and broke. It's still alive, but much dramatically sort of sheared off, and so there's a very pointy shear pointing into the sky. And something about that responds to the sculpture beautifully, and that's something we couldn't have predicted. So it's those joys of getting it in place are really, really lovely. In terms of the challenges with this one, these are whopping great big sculptures, and one of the things we always have to be careful about is our floor strong enough to take them? Do we have to reinforce the floor? And how on earth do you get them into place? So with a couple of the big sculptures, we had to hire a crane that was lifting them over the historic walls.
So hang on, you removed the roof?
No. The ones that are in, so we've got 2 outside, one in the colonnade and one in our front garden that had to be hoisted over the wall.
Okay, but the
ones inside,
how did
because we were working with Pat, he can take them apart and reconstruct them, which is great. But working with a hoist, I'm sure for the guys who are managing the hoist, they do it every day and they're completely fine about it. Sitting there as the director watching this whopping great big sculpture, like a millimetre above the John Soane historic wall and only a few feet away from a sort of historic lamppost and so on, you're thinking, how on earth is he going to maneuver it? They do it brilliantly, of course, and it all comes in fine, but it's quite exciting to see it come in.
God, I can imagine. And what about things that you have coming up?
Yes.
Did you want to speak about anything you're doing over the next few months?
Absolutely. So we've got a whole programme of activities, some super schools programmes where we're introducing children to Anthony Caro, and they have had, it's interesting, a lot of people suggested to us that it would be harder to engage children with abstract sculpture. Quite the reverse. The schools have been really enjoying the programmes, and they love Child's Tower, but actually really love engaging with some of the other sculptures too. So the schools programme has been really exciting, but we're also offering a whole range of family programmes. We have free on Sunday mornings and have some lovely workshops and things for families. But also a big project for us this year is our Thursday Lates, where we're open free every evening on Thursdays from 5 till 8, and we always have some form of talk, lecture, workshop, something going on. So we've had quite a few engaging specifically with Caro and his sculptures, but a few more on broader subjects too. And then we're very excited about a project we're going to be launching in a month's time, is in the house, so adjacent to the gallery. We have got a few models of Caro sculptures displayed in Soane's small drawing room. Soane himself was so enthusiastic about using models, and so we will be borrowing from the Soane Museum a model of Soane's what he planned for the house at Pitzhanger, and so it would be really fun to have that juxtaposed with Caro's models and look at how he adapted his plans for Pitzhanger to what he actually built. And we're planning to do to start displaying in the house a rotation of contemporary artists' works, much in the way that Soane would have done, in the way that he hung Turner and Canaletto on his walls. We're starting to work in partnership with various different contemporary artists, doing some at home at Pitzhanger displays starting in June. So we very much look forward to welcoming people back in June so they can see lots of exciting new changes in the house.
Fantastic. That sounds really exciting. You've been listening to In Talks with me, Danielle Radoichin. The sound and theme music is by Woogie Productions, and the artwork is by Patrick Wall. If you enjoyed this episode, please pass it on to someone who you think might also like it. Please subscribe and leave a review. To pitch for guest ideas, you can DM me via my socials at Danielle Radoichin. Thanks for listening.